Cari Clark. I'm your moderator, and along with Sharon Watkins, we created the Chez Zee Author Series in 2016 so that we could hear from local authors in a fun and relaxed setting. And by day, I'm a realtor with Sotheby's Realty. And if you ever need any real estate buying or selling, I hope you'll give me the chance to win your business. And I have the Art and Home magazine is a little takeaway. If that's interesting to you, please take it with you. Tonight, we obviously have Matthew Dowd.
Hey.
And thank you all. I'm going to give you a little of his bio. First, also, do y'all remember last month that we had Kate Dawson here, and we raised some money so that she could donate some money for the refugee kids at Dawson Elementary. Well, between Chez Zee and all of us in this room, we raised $500. So a lot of kids got to have books at Dawson Elementary. So Matthew was born in Michigan, and he's the third of 11 children. His father was an auto executive. He's worked for politicians in the 90s. He worked for Lloyd Benson and Bob Bullock. And he also was the chief strategist, as we probably all know, for the two presidential campaigns for George W. Bush. He was also a political strategist for Arnold Schwarzenegger's 2006 re-election campaign. He started numerous businesses. He's co-written the New York Times best-selling Applebee's America. I don't know if y'all have read that, I have. He's taught at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, and he's been a visiting fellow at the University of Chicago. And currently, he's a political analyst for ABC News. What we usually do is talk about the author's most current work, and his most current work is A New Way. And I thought we would start off by you telling us a little bit about this book.
Okay, it's great to be here. I live up the road now in Wimberley, which is a fabulous place to live, and then commute to New York, because that's where most of my work for ABC. But it's great whenever I get in my truck and I get on that road outside of Kyle, and I'm like, it's worth it to live here. The book was a long time in coming. I started taking notes on it, actually, in about 2007 and 2008, just jotting. I didn't have a title, I didn't have any ideas, I just started taking notes about my thoughts on things. Having gone through, which I talk about in the book, a lot of transitions in various things in my life, things that had happened to me, lost a daughter here at Seton, and threw away my professional career when I had a big break with Bush in the front page of the New York Times. And so many things had gone on, and it's sort of my own level of struggle and disruption, and led to a lot that was in here. And I would put things down, write them, and then put it away, come back to it. And then after the election in 2016, I had all these notes, all this stuff I had written, all this stuff I had typed, and it finally sort of coalesced into this book. And the book is titled A New Way. I'm making sure I get the right. Embracing the paradox as we lead and serve. I always get that part. Embracing, is it embracing or insisting? Embracing the paradox as we lead and serve. And it's the idea of the book is we are at a time of great disruption. And a lot of people have various levels of frustrations, anxieties for many different things. And I try to reference in the book that we've gone through these periods in our history before at certain times. Probably 3 or 4 times in our history we've been in moments like this where there's disruption at all levels, the economy, politics, culture, and then everybody is going through their own personal struggles in all of that time. And so the book was designed to sort of try to explain that, where we are as a country, and then give some insights into what I think the leadership that we need in this moment. It's not just what president we want or what the values that we care about broadly, but also it is what can we do in our own lives and the communities that we're in to sort of make the change that needs to happen in this disruptive but transformative time. So that's the broad sort of paint of the book. I start the book off with a pilgrimage I took that sort of leads the book, because that really sort of formed a lot of my thinking in this.
Your chapters are broken into, your tagline is, embracing the paradox. So that your chapters are broken up into paradoxes. So I'm curious, you sound a little more like a philosopher than some, politico to me when I read this.
Hard-edge political strategist.
Yeah. And so...
Trust me, when I broke with Bush, it's funny, it's an interesting thing you say. When I broke with Bush, so when I had that big break and it was coming out, and it was actually in a conversation I had with a New York Times reporter at Las Manitas, when Las Manitas was at their conference. And the reason I picked there, it was like 200 feet from where the Bush campaign was headquartered, which was also at 3rd and Congress in 2000. And this reporter, Jim Rutenberg, I'm sure you've seen his byline, really great guy. He came down, and over 3 hours at lunch, I sort of went on this whole thing about what I thought and what I felt and in all of that. And the White House then was called when the reporter did this, and they couldn't say, that there's a couple of things they couldn't say. They couldn't say that I wasn't involved at all because I was intimately involved in the campaign and in the White House and things that I did, so they couldn't say that. What do they call them now? Coffee boys. I guess that's how Trump people they couldn't say I was a coffee boy or whatever it was. And they also couldn't say that I hadn't voiced these concerns to all of them in all of it, which I had done. I had voiced a lot of concerns and a lot of things that I thought we were off on as in the presidency and in the White House. So they came up with this thing this line, because this was in the aftermath of some of the things that I mentioned that happened in my life. They said, he's on a personal journey, which was, I think, code for woo. So yeah, I think it is. I think there is some practical applications in it, but there's also sort of some philosophical elements of it. And I think part of the reason I chose the word paradox, and it's my own path, which is we're often in life forced to pick between one or the other, right? It's either this or it's that, right? It's either I'm going to do this, I got to make this decision, it has to be black or it has to be white. And most of what I've learned and most of what I've discovered in life is that most of the truth that we see in life and leadership is in the paradox. Is in the paradox between what we think are two opposing things, but really the truth is fundamentally in the paradox of those things, or in the blending of two major drives that in the end we have to figure out a way to weave our way through those in the paradox of those two things. So that's why it's the paradox. And I continue, trust me, as I analyze and discuss the White House, paradox is a perfect word. Diplomatically, perfect diplomatic word for I think what we're faced in the country and the world.
So what were you hoping to achieve? You wanted to give people...
I just wanted to get the book out.
Okay. You say as we lead and serve, so it's a call to lay people, it's a call to leaders.
But it's also lead and serve is in the subtitle for a reason. And lead and serve, I think that one of the parts that I find missing in much of the leadership is people will stand up and say they're a leader, but they don't understand the serve part of it. They don't understand that leading is actually being a humble servant. And we've had a major contrast with what we've seen over the course of the last few years. But I think it's really important to understand both of those words, leading and serving, to be fundamentally the type of leaders we have to have.
All right, well, give us an example of a paradox. For example, like head versus heart, Obama, Bush.
Sure. So I have 8 chapters on this, taking each paradox, and one of the ones I talk about is head and heart. And I think often we're pushed into, you need to use your head, you need to find all of the logical reasons why, and that has to be, or people say, they give you advice, well, just follow your heart, right? They just say, just follow your heart, which is great advice, but then you're like, well, how does that work actually? And how do I do that? And so I think part of it is that, and I talk about the truth being both in the head and our heart, and both discovering things from our heart. They're both truths. Truths are not just some science that all it is some level of science that we have. It is discovered through both our head and our heart, and I think that paradox is really important in how we live our daily lives. I think we have to feel our way through things. I think we have to allow ourselves open to some of that quiet intuition that maybe just, as I talk about in the book, the quiet voices that speak to us that we oftentimes ignore, or that we oftentimes talk ourselves out of. A lot with, like, if you're in a relationship that's not fulfilling, or in a job that you want to change, or in a type of work that you're doing that you don't feel fulfilled in, your heart's telling you something, and there's certain quiet voices of your heart saying things to you, but many times we're like, well, that just can't work out, or how do the logistics of that work? And I think blending the two, blending those voices in our heart, the feelings that we have that are coming through our heart, through a great capacity that I have, that is how we connect with people in love, in a way of love, which is another chapter of love and fear, of both embracing the paradox of love and fear. And I think that, to me, is so important, that we have leaders, and we have each of us, figuring out a way to meld the two, both what are the signals of our heart, but also what does our head say, how do we get to where we need to go in that, and not letting our heart overwhelm us, but not letting our head convince us of not following how the Spirit is moving us.
And you talk about how the decision for Bush to go to war, he led with his heart instead of his head. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, so I think oftentimes when things happen, obviously everybody cheers when he stood up on the rubble and put the megaphone on and said, the world hears you, I hear you, and I hear you, and the world's going to hear all of us soon. And I think obviously many people, we needed to do something in the aftermath of that because of what happened. Obviously losing that many 2,000 people in the World Trade Center in New York. Something needed to be done, and so it was a response I think he felt needed to happen, but I think the head part of that was missing. Like, what it now would entail is, if we went into Afghanistan and then we went into Iraq, what would that entail, and would we really be able to exit? Would we really be able to accomplish the mission? Would we really be able to do it? And I think it was very much a feel way to go. And I think then, in the aftermath of a decision, I'm not one of the people that buys into this idea they were just looking for some excuse to go invade Iraq. I don't think that's true. But I do think what happened is the decision was made, and then information was sought that confirmed that decision. And I think that's what happened in it. And I think as we went prolonged, and we're still in the middle of this, right? It's been 15, we're in this now 15 years. And I had my oldest son served in Iraq, did 2 tours of duty in Iraq. He actually enlisted, and I drove him to go to boot camp a week before President Bush's re-election. So I'm helping President Bush get re-elected, and my son decides on his own to enlist in the war. And then I don't know, I'm about to re-elect a president that's going to make the decision to send him, and he did. He did 2 tours in Iraq. And I think, and he's fluent in Arabic. Daniel's fluent in Arabic, and he learned that while he was in the Army when he got sent to the Defense Language Institute. And he came away with that. His whole thought was, we either need to get out today, or we're going to have to stay for 100 years in this. Just from a 20-year-old, 21-year-old's perspective, by talking to people in Iraq, villagers, and all of that. And it's amazing to me how unaware, or if there were people there, I think there were people aware, they just weren't listened to, that we got ourselves in a situation by following somebody's heart in response to an awful, horrible assault on our country, but we didn't plan it through with our heads.
And you feel like Bush really missed an opportunity to unite us after 9/11. Instead, we went into war.
Yeah, I think we've had, so the president, after 9/11, the president had a 90% approval rating. And his approval rating was as high among Democrats, independents as it was among Republicans. And it was a time, in my view, and this is one of the reasons why I wrote with Bush in the aftermath of all this, it wasn't just the war, but it was also about, we had ran on the idea of being a uniter, not a divider. That was what we ran on, and I had only worked on Democratic campaigns before that. He was the first Republican that I'd ever worked for, and my thought was, okay, he worked with the Democratic Lieutenant Governor, a friend of mine who now passed and who I worked for, Bob Bullock, and he worked with the Democratic Speaker, Pete Laney. Wouldn't that be great if we could do that and unite the country in a similar way in Washington, D.C.? And I think we had a huge window of opportunity to do that when the country would have supported all kinds of transformational stuff. We could have done immigration reform, we could have done healthcare reform, we could have done infrastructure, spending on infrastructure through around the country and all of that. But we didn't, because the country would have supported basically most of what Bush would have offered, and he would have had the political capital to get all of that done. Transformed our federal government, which still needs transformation to respond to the 21st century. So I do think he missed a huge boat, and obviously his presidency ended up falling apart based on that decision in the aftermath of 9/11, and he left the presidency with a 30%, 32% job approval rating. When he left the presidency. It's not only till now when he's become popular again, but I think it's mainly it's like standing next to somebody really fat and you look thinner, and I think Bush looks really good right now to a lot of people, because it's a contrast to what most people want. And I also think, I'm going to give, I think President Obama missed some opportunities too. I mean, I mentioned this in the book. I think President Obama got elected, and I voted for him in 2008. Met him, he and I met in 2006 at the Driscoll Hotel to talk through. He was asking my advice and stuff. He hadn't formally decided he was going to run, and he had reached out and asked to have a meeting, which we did right downtown, that nobody knew about. And so I was very supportive, but one of the things I said to him is the country can't tolerate more partisanship and more polarization. It's getting worse and worse. And if we allow that to happen, you need to be head of the country, not head of your party, and you got to make sure you make decisions based on that, because with what happened with Bush. And I think after his election, he had an opportunity, not as big as Bush did, but he was a historical figure, first African American elected, young, named Barack Obama. He was supported by Democrats, obviously, independents, and a huge chunk of Republicans supported him at the outset. And I think he did some things, but I think he also made a lot of decisions in the presidency that ended up becoming partisan. In all of these things, there's two sides to this, and I understand the Congress, and I understand what they push back on him. But I think a president is only responsible fundamentally for how he behaves. And so I think he also had an opportunity. And in the aftermath of Bush, the country was more polarized. And in the aftermath of President Obama, the country is even more polarized in the aftermath. And if you want to trace, this is sort of the thing, Donald Trump, talking about Donald Trump for a second, is Donald Trump didn't create the problem we have. Now, he's causing proximate disruption in many of the decisions he makes and how he talks. But Donald Trump is a result of years of growth and leaders not responding to what the country wanted and was asking for. And that's why he's a result. Donald Trump is not necessarily a cause of where the country is today. He's in many ways a result of where the country is today.
You talk about, your book is chock full of lots of things we could talk about, but you talk about the need for common facts for common good, which you say is the basis of our system of government. Can you expand on that?
So, there's this Francis Fukuyama, great writer. He's written a lot of different books. He wrote a book a long time ago, and part of the book was analyzing why do democracies emerge in some places and succeed, and they don't emerge in other places in the world. Why is that? And he went through and researched all of that, Central America, South America, the Middle East, all over the world. And the fundamental thing, he said, there was a number of factors, but the most fundamental factor was the ability to leave your tribe and work in the common good. To leave your tribe behind and say, okay, that's what my tribe wants, but I'm going to do what's best and reach consensus for the common good. So he said, if you don't have that, you can't have a democracy. Democracies depend on that. So democracies depend, and our founding fathers wrote all about that, the ability to they even used the term the common good. about that's the why we're going to set up our system of government, so all of these disparate factions and all that can come together and do what's in the interest of the common good. But because of polarization and tribalization, we are now as far away from that as we've probably ever been in our country's history, I would say, as far away from that ability and desire for some people to leave their tribe, come out of their tribe, and do what's in the interest of the common good. And the only way you can get to the common good is if you have a common set of facts. And what's developed, because, and we don't even have a common set of facts today, right? We can't even, it's not even just an argue about policy, right? Or an argue about a set of values that we want the government to represent. We can't even agree on the set of facts that we have today. And that polarization has caused a lot of that, but one of the things that has caused a lot of that is technological change. And technological change has brought us many great things, but anytime there's change or technological change in the history of the world, you gain, but you also lose. Anytime. Even when the written word was, when we finally were able to print things, we lost something. We lost the oral tradition, which was very important, people that gather and tell stories and all of that. But every time we do that, we gain, but we also lose something. And what happened, I think, in this technological change, it's allowed people to seek out sources of information that confirm their biases. Right? And so people have a certain cable channel they watch, or they have blogs that they read, or they have internet sites that they go to, or they have now what we've done is people now move next to each other that agree with them in many ways. And so that whole thing has caused people to go from what they have as an opinion. If you think about this, if you have an opinion, I have an opinion, you have an opinion, we can sit down and have a conversation and probably reach some consensus about something. But if you have a set of facts and you have a set of facts and I have a set of facts, which happens when you confirm your bias over and over and over again, if you have a bias and you go to the same sources of information and can confirm it over and over again, the opinion moves to a fact. And that fact, then, if we have fact differences, we can't come to consensus. If there's a set of facts I believe and there's a set of facts that you believe. And I think that's a huge, huge problem facing the world, but really specifically facing our country today is a common set of facts. And in a way to express, a way for the country as a whole to express how it feels. Because part of our system, I think, needs some fundamental change. Because the way now that the country expresses herself, it seems the loudest voices and the most virulent people that have their feelings are only given the megaphones. And so a huge swath of the country is left out of the conversation that's going on around many of the political jurisdictions in the country. And I think we are headed for change. We are in the midst of that change. The two political parties, in my view, that are currently constituted, that's fundamental change that needs to happen. I think we're going to head to a more of a multi-party system where people have to build coalitions. I think we're headed there for many different reasons, not only the need, but because technology is going to actually help that be accomplished. But that's a huge problem. We can't even, there's the arguments that we have about basic things that you think everybody agrees with this. They don't.
Well, and you say that we are at a crossroads in a very crucial moment. And is that because we're so divided, or what makes you say that?
So, and if anybody has heard me say this before, I'm sorry, but so I think we're at a moment that comes around every 70 or 80 years in our country's history. And we are in that moment. If you think about where we were 70 or 80 years ago before now, we were in the midst of the Great Depression and the advent of World War II, and the second industrial revolution, which was created by mass production. Yeah. And a changing communication environment. Radio had just become very popular. It was the way people were communicating, which hadn't existed before, and television was just beginning to come into fruition. 70 or 80 years before that, we were in the midst of the Civil War and the Industrial Revolution. So we were changing from an agrarian-based economy to an industrial-based economy. And 70 or 80 years ago before that, we were in the midst of the American Revolution, first establishment of modern democracy. We are in that moment today. And we are in the moment where institutions that were created in the previous time of this change no longer seem to function and work in the way they're supposed to work. and we are in a turning of a generation where new generations are coming up that want to see things differently, which is why I'm so glad and I think blessed with we're all to see what's happened out of Parkland High School, and the high school students actually voice themselves. That is the generation that it's always happened. There is, if you want to know in the history of our country, in the history of the world, what usually happens is the older generation understands that change and knows they have to go there, but that they may not be comfortable with it. And they mentor or they partner with the younger generations that really want to push the change. That's where the real change occurs. Mentored, or in many ways, led in ways of people that are discerning, that they understand they're going to have to give up something, but pushed with great energy by younger generations. That's happened before in our country's history, and we're in that moment now. And I call Donald Trump the great accelerator because I think he is going to help accelerate that change. He's going to help actually bind the generations together more, and we're all gonna, I think the process of this has been, even in the parts of the presidency that none of us like, what he's causing is all of us to sort of say, what do we stand for? Who are we? What are the values that really represent, and how can we put those into action in that? And so we're in that moment. And the fascinating thing, I'll give you another historical insight in this. At every one of those moments, there's two leaders paired together, and if you think about our country's history, they're usually paired with what would be called the worst of our presidents paired with our best of our presidents. So if you think about 70 or 80 years ago, Herbert Hoover was succeeded by FDR, who was always ranked as one of our best presidents. Before that, James Buchanan, who's always considered one of our worst presidents, was paired with Lincoln. And before that, you could say George Washington is paired with King George. Right? In that. And you can decide for yourself whether President Trump is James Buchanan or Abraham Lincoln. You can make that decision. But I think that's always leaders. So far, I'm going to say this so far, I'm a very optimistic and hopeful person in all this, and I think we're going to get through this, and I think we're going to be better off. But there's no guarantee of it, right? Democracy is a gift, not a given. And we have to understand that the only way we get to where we need to go, like all those other times, like the greatest generations, like the generations that helped this process, that helped us go, was because people stood up and did what was necessary, beginning in their local communities and neighborhoods, and then it builds. Because leaders in Washington never lead. They never lead. They follow where we tell them to go. And the best leaders, the FDRs, the Teddy Roosevelts, the JFKs, they figure out how to get one half step in front of where the country wants to go. That's what they do. And so ultimately, if we are concerned, the only way we get through this time and get to the other side where we ultimately evolve our country to a better place, which, you know, the history of our country has always been in the words to form a more perfect union. We're not a perfect union, but how do we do the things necessary to form a more perfect union and move more towards that direction is up to us. Fundamentally, it's up to us. And, you know, people are, you know, the great thing is people, the energy, as I say, has been created. The turnouts that have happened in elections over the course of the past year and a half have been unprecedented in special elections. There's a big special election today in Pennsylvania. The turnout in that special election will set all kinds of records for special elections that will be broken. People are very concerned, and they're trying to figure out a way to express it. There'll be a number of arguments about what's the best way forward, but I think it's always, Jefferson talked about this constantly, we always need to recreate our democracy so it fits, recreate who we are so it fits where we are as a time, as a country, and I think we're in one of those recreation moments. But people in those moments, I'm sorry, people in those moments can be harmed.
Yeah.
And disruptive can turn to destructive very quickly. So I'm not saying that this isn't without pain, and this isn't without struggle, and this isn't without certain things that happen to groups of people in this country. But I think the only way to, as I say, the only way to lead through it is we have to step up. all generations have to step up.
Who do you see being harmed currently?
Like every other point in our history when we've gone through this, it's whatever looks new, whatever looks different is usually the subject of the target of it. And this has happened before. It happened in the Know Nothing movement, and it happened as we led into a civil war where brother killed brother. Anybody that looks different or seems out of place or culturally that feels like the underpinnings, it's causing what many people feel the underpinnings of what their belief system is based on to change, they're usually the target. The best leaders appeal to our greatest angels and point us towards a direction of love. The worst leaders appeal to fear and point us in direction of hate. And I think anything new or anything different or anything that causes a community to change is usually the ones that suffer in the moment because they just, they don't fit what some group of people. I mean, and one of the things to keep in mind is, we often say, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this happened or whatever. But if you just read a history book, right, about what was going on in various points in times in our history. My ancestors were Irish. They were treated in many ways like many of the folks that are treated today. They didn't want to hire them. They thought they were scum. The same thing happened to the Chinese. Same thing happened to the Germans. Same thing happened to Jewish people. Many different groups in our country. Same thing happened to people that weren't Christians. All of that. We've had an element in our country's history that it's small and it's a minority, but it has surfaces at times, especially as at times it arrives in moments where people are in fear of their life changing. And their lives are changing. And so I think one of the things, I was mentioning this to my friend Charles Barnett, who's here today, that we have to have, I think one of the greatest divides we have is empathy in our country today. And we have this huge empathy divide where each side lines up, puts on their jersey, and is unwilling to have empathy for why the other people might feel the way they do. I'm not saying agree with them, I'm not saying that just acquiesce to them, but at least we ought to have some empathy of why people would be afraid when things in their community, why they're no longer going to have a job like their fathers. Or marriage changes, the definition of marriage changes for them that they was in their minds was in the same place for thousands of years and now changes over the course of just a few years. And I think so each side needs to have empathy. Why would one side think like, wow, that's a lot of hate coming at me and I'm going to react against it? The other side needs to understand why people feel so afraid today now in the midst of what we are in. So I think part of this beginning of this, the way we heal, is we have to create a space where we at least can start with some level of empathy of why the other side might be reacting, though in many times disturbing ways, in inappropriate ways, and uncivilized ways. But what is behind that? Usually it's some fear, and it's usually a fear of change, and it's usually a fear of loss. Right? They feel like they're losing something that they counted on and held on, and they don't know where, if they lose that, right, where are they going to be in this new world? And I think empathy is one of the main ways that I think we can get through this.
You also say that the media should do more to encourage collaboration between our parties, and my question to you is, how's that going to happen? How do you see that happening?
I think it's going to happen, I think it happens one person at a time, and then as people do this. I mean, one of the things I try to do, and I'm not always great at because I get irritated and upset about stuff and all of that, and I try, people think I'm very critical of Trump. They have no idea what I hold back. In this time, and I'm one of the ones that okay, let's give him. He's now been elected president. May not be the result that many people wanted and everything, but okay, let's see if he'll do the things and he'll grow in the office and do all the things. Okay, let's do that. I think it's one person at a time, beginning to say, okay, I'd rather be kind than right. I think that's a huge part of it. Is making a decision. The media makes a decision, and they have to see their place. And this is one of the things I try to do in some level of meditation or centering prayer or whatever every time I go on is what small thing can I do in the media that will basically help the country. And I think the media needs to see their role more broadly instead of, okay, there's two sides that are fighting and let me report on the fighting, or there's this and there's this. They have an instrumental role as leaders in getting us through this, I think the media. And I think more and more leaders in the media are emerging this way. One thing I'm amazed at is I actually think there is a financial reason to do this. Because I think for all of the bluster that people get, whether it's Fox News or MSNBC or whatever, there's a huge part of the country that doesn't feel like they're being talked to, right? There's a huge part of the country that feels like, well, I don't hate my neighbor, or I don't hate this, or I don't hate that person. I just want to figure out a space where it's not just a food fight. You know, let's put 7 people at a table and everybody throws food at each other and then back to you. And I think there is a financial place for that. I mean, one thing to keep in mind is between MSNBC and Fox and CNN, in total, they get about 20 million viewers in total. There's 150 million people that will vote in the next presidential election. So there's a huge part of the country that doesn't necessarily want to consume information and is actually available for people to create. It's a consumer market, if you think about it like a consumer, underserved consumer market that nobody is really speaking to at the moment let's talk about the national media. There are some newspapers in that I think that speak to it better, and locally, I think there's many places locally. But it's a huge underserved market, so 2 things. One is somebody's going to finally recognize that there's a financial opportunity in this. And 2 is I think as people more and more of us begin to practice what we want to see, I think you'll see a change in that media environment. But other than that, I don't think you can I don't think you can pass a law, I don't think you can do that. It's social change that is done person by person by person, even in a thing as tightly controlled as the media.
Well, are these people the same kind of people you talk about poverty of the soul? Are these kind of the people who feel, I mean, I don't know if they're the same people, but I know I've stopped watching television. I cannot watch the bickering. It's too negative. And, you know, for you personally, you seem like you're a person who's a seeker. I want you to tell us a little bit more about the pilgrimage that you went on, where you went and what you saw,
Sure.
And kind of some of the transformative experiences you had.
Sure, so that leads to sort of what I believe is one of the fundamental problems in America is we often talk, if we talk about it at all, poverty as in physical poverty, people that are hungry and all that, but there's a great poverty of the soul, which, as I call it, poverty of the soul, which is people feeling like, where do I belong, where do I fit? And it doesn't matter if you have $1 million home or you sleep under the Congress Avenue Bridge, or whatever, there's levels of all people that feel this sense of a poverty of the soul, a loss of their spirit, a lack of space. Where's my home? And I don't mean that physically, but where's my home? Where do I feel that community and sense of community? So in the aftermath, as I say, of all of these changes in my life, my son getting sent to Iraq, a loss of a daughter, a jettisoning of a political career, I had a dream, so I start the book up with this, where I woke up from the dream and I had walked in all the paths of the major spiritual faiths, right, all the major faiths. And so I woke up from it and I was like, okay, I should do that. And I did a little research and then called Josephine's mom. We're divorced. She called her mom and said, hey, I want to take a trip. I want to take this trip. This was in 2007, in summer 2007. Can you keep Josephine when I'm supposed to have her? Great. And then I researched a bit. So, okay, Buddhism. It was Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And so I did a bunch of research and found out like where I might need to go. And you can't go to Mecca and Medina because you have to be a Muslim to go to those places. So where can I go? There's places in Turkey and there's obviously places in Israel that you can go to. And so I did a bunch of research, called the travel agents that sort of does an international travel like that. And I said, this is what I want to do. And so she says, okay, I'll check. And so she calls back about a half a day later and says, okay, you can do it, but it's going to be a total planes, trains, and automobiles kind of trip. I said, great, book me a non-refundable flight to New Delhi. Because I felt like if I didn't do it, then I'd figure out a way to back out of it. Like, oh, no. And so I left, got off in New Delhi with a backpack. So all I had was me by myself, and proceeded to go through all of these things. I went to where Hinduism supposedly began on the Ganges River, went through all of India, went to Nepal where Buddha was born, went to where he got Bhagavad, where he got enlightenment, and then went all around, went through Turkey, and I traveled. I told myself, okay, you're going to travel the way most people travel. So I got on the back of the trains in India, which was quite the experience in that, because I wanted to experience all of that, and went to Jerusalem, went to the Sea of Galilee, and went to Rome, because I'm Catholic and grew up Catholic, and ended the trip in Assisi, because St. Francis is sort of personal hero of mine. And I ended up at the end of the trip with this beard and beads on, which was quite the thing when I stopped in Tel Aviv airport and tried to get through security. With my passport had been stamped along the way, and so that was quite the experience. I wanted to shave myself, and yeah, I'm the Bush guy, but that was gone. And so I came away. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, even physically. I got real sick along the way. I ended up in a hospital in Istanbul, a Muslim Turkish hospital. They didn't speak any English. I had 104 fever, and the kindness that I was shown along the way. But I really learned so much. I mean, I've always been an avid reader and read a lot, but you really learn how much of all of the faiths that we constantly see dividing us actually are united on some common principles. And they're united fundamentally on two common principles that Jesus talked about in the New Testament, which is they're all fundamentally on believe in something bigger than yourself, whatever you call it, connect to something bigger than yourself, which in many people's minds is God, but whatever that is, something in the universe, whatever that is, and love each other like you want to love yourself. So treat each other like you want to be treated. All of that. And as I experienced all of that path, you realize how much of all the other stuff is all like divisions by ritual, divisions by how you approach the self, but those are the fundamental tenets of all of those spiritual faiths. And the other thing that struck me is as I would go to these, what I would call sacred places in all of these countries, to go to the actual sacred place, you have to walk through this sea of humanity, that people are, 5-year-olds begging, and people without limbs, people that are asleep in the dirt, and all of that. So you have to walk through this humanity to get to the sacred place, which I thought was such a actually visible lesson, that the sacred place really is fundamentally is in a walk through our shared humanity in this. And so I finished that trip, came home, and it stuck with me. It was really one of the things many of the parts of the book were thought about and reflected on in that time, and the leaders of that. And the other thing you learn in that, in understanding that, is that most all of change, fundamental change in the world, is a local leader that stands up and speaks the truth in a loving way. If you think about it, most every leader in the history of the world is somebody local that stood up, didn't go very far about it. You think about and didn't have a cable channel, and didn't have the internet, and didn't have but they spoke the truth in a loving way, and talked about the relationship that we have to each other. And whether it's the Buddha, whether it's Jesus, whether it's the prophets in the Old Testament, whether it's Muhammad, whether it's Gandhi in more modern times, they were all somebody that stood up with a truth to speak and doing it in a kind and loving way, regardless of the faith, which is why I think Gandhi said, they asked him what his faith was, and he said, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian, but really what I am, my faith is love. That's what Gandhi said, was his faith was love. And his God was truth. That's what he said, my God is truth and my faith is love. And I think that's what you learn in the circles of all, what I learned on this pilgrimage, which of course when I got back, people were like, "Oh, he really is on a personal journey." But it had huge impact on me, and it taught me a lot about human beings around the world.
Will you tell us, and then I'll turn it over to, I'll be thinking about your questions. I'll open it up to the floor, but tell us what you're working on now. What do you do besides your ABC gig?
I live in Wimberley, which is great, on the Blanco River. I started if you're ever in Wimberley during the week from 8 to 8:30, at Chapel of the Hills, which is a interdenominational church there. I do an 8 to 8:30 morning centering prayer meditation group where some of us gather and we do readings, and it can be anything. It can be religious readings, it can be a poem, it can be whatever. It was important for me to do that. I have done that practice for 10 years or so, and I decided to sort of try to create something in more of a community atmosphere. And obviously a huge part of my time. I thought I would have more time to do other things, but then Trump took office, and in many ways it's helped the media, because there's a huge part of it that is consumed by the entertainment quality of it. So I spend a lot of times, as I say, I commute to New York, I spend a lot of times with ABC. I started a company to help invest in for-profit social good companies. So companies that are startups that have a way to make money, that have a way to sort of be financially successful. So they're not philanthropy per se, but they're trying to accomplish a social good, whether it's urban housing or some different approach to healthcare or something that's trying to do a social good, but they actually have a financial model. So I've done that. I've invested in 5 or 6 different businesses to try to push that along. Because I actually believe that capitalism, done properly, is actually the solution to many of the problems. I don't think we can solve all the problems with philanthropy. The pie of dollars available for capitalism is that big. The pie of dollars available for philanthropy is that big. Even if it's billions, it's only that big. And so we have to figure out some way, in my view, to create a consciousness around capitalism that is able to, people can hire people, they can do certain things, but they can actually accomplish a social good. They can make money and accomplish a social good. What we have today, in my view, is not really a free market. It's been, and I'll be opinionated slightly, but I think it's based on facts. We have a rigged system today that only benefits a certain segment. And for the first time if you think about it, for the first time in our country's history, capitalism no longer lifts all boats simultaneously. So before capitalism was wealthy people would gain wealth, but what happened is the middle class would move and the lower classes, the working classes, would also move. Well, we've now had 25 or 30 years where only one segment is fundamentally moved and the other segment has not. They're basically the average working class person in America has not seen a fundamental change in their pay or their income or their net worth in 30 years. 30 years, they have not seen a change. While this has seen, I think, a 400% increase, the top 1% or the top 5%. That is not sustainable. I don't understand why corporations and wealthy people don't understand it. If that continues, what's coming is a lot of people, angry people that have been continued to left behind in this. And so I think that for me, the only way we're going to really, I think capitalism has created great wealth and has brought the world along in many ways, but we've diverted now for quite a while from that model that worked so well that we need to figure out a way to retool capitalism in a way that the vast swath of society benefits from how wealth is gained in the world.
All right, who's got questions? I've got one right here.
Okay, the only thing I'm going to say, and I know I don't need to say this for this crowd because you're lovely and civilized, no Chris Matthews questions. And a Chris Matthews question is 5 minutes of talking and he puts a question mark at the end of it. So that's the only thing I'm going to ask. No Chris Matthews questions.
You're just going to have to pass the mic around because
There's so many people.
I can't get to you all.
You said earlier that leaders need to know what the common good is. If you were to be if you could advise Trump or a new leader, how does one discern what the common good is?
Sure. So, great question. So I'm going to tell you all this little story. So, on the day of the State of the Union, I had to go to Washington to report on the President's State of the Union address. And in the morning, I got an email. In that morning, I got an email from Hope Hicks, was in the White House. And she's on her way out. I don't know if she's still there from all that controversy that happened. It said she said, "Can you come by the White House to meet?" And so I wrote it back and was like, at first was like, well, maybe, okay, possibly, I don't know. And then she writes back and said, how about 3 o'clock? So I said, sure. And I was like, okay, this is, and I had talked to her a number of times. She had reached out before because I'm on ABC and she wanted to have a relationship and all of that. And so I go over there and I'm meeting with her in her office, and her office was the closest office to the Oval Office. There was nobody closer to her to Donald Trump's the Oval Office and then Hope Hicks. And so we're in the middle, we're talking about stuff, and she's being very frank on certain things and on stuff that they had thought they hadn't done well on and all of that. And then she walks out of her office for a minute and says, "Tell me when the Vice President leaves the Oval Office." And they say, sure. And so she comes back in, sits down, and then about 5 minutes later, somebody comes in that gives her a signal. She goes, "Okay, we're going to go meet the President and go meet with Trump." And so I'm like, okay. And I'm dressed just on boots. I have a tie on because I was going to the White House, but I'm just basically dressed like this. So I go in to meet with the President, and they obviously know that I've been like very critical, right, of the President, and I call it out all the time and all of that. And he's sitting behind the desk, the Resolute desk there in the office, and Hope sits kind of in the corner. And this is a few hours before the State of the Union address, right? There's nothing on his desk, not a single thing on his, not a pen, not a paperclip, not a binder, not a book, there's not even a picture on the desk in the Oval, which we'd often been heard and reported, but it was because I've been in there before. I met with President Obama in the Oval Office in 2010 after the midterms, and obviously I met with President Bush in there. So that was kind of adjusting, and so he stands up and shakes my hand, and the first thing he says is, "I just want to say I'm a huge fan of yours, and I have great respect for you." And I was like, I didn't know what to say. I was like, okay. And then later on, I told somebody the story, and they said, later on I told somebody the story, and I said, I think he was wanting you to say something back to him. And I said, well, I didn't. I just stood there like... and then we had this conversation. He said some things that part of the conversation was off the record or whatever, but I was pushing on him to try to get to the common good about like the State of the Union, and he needed it, like what was really the biggest problem in our country today was not all of these issue sets and all this, was basically divisions within our country, and we need leaders that help bring the country together. That's first and foremost. And I'm a huge believer, and I told this to President Obama when I met with him, said the same thing to President Trump, is I think what needs to be changed is we need to stop pursuing the ends of government, and we need to fix the means. And if we fix the means of government and fix the means of our politics, the ends will be fine. If we figure out a way to talk to each other, reach consensus, get to the common good, then the ends will be fine. The ends will take care of themselves, but the means are broken. And I expressed that to him, and he's of course like, well, I'm going to give a speech that's going to unite the country, and I'm going to give the State of the Union address at night. I was like, well, that's great. And then I said to him, well, you've got to do more than just a speech, right? And he goes, what? I said, well, I was like, well, you've got to like the next day and the next day and the next day, you've got to demonstrate that what you've said by uniting, whatever you're going to say about uniting the country, you're actually following through on, and that you're giving another speech on, and another speech on, another speech on, and it was almost as if like that's the first person that ever told him that. Because I don't actually think he gets many people, as you would imagine, he doesn't get many people that push back on him. And I was like, I wasn't nervous at all, because one, I've been around a lot of people that have held a lot of different offices, but two, it's like, what's he gonna do? It doesn't matter to me, but on all of this. So we went through all this, and I pushed on all of that. And I tell this in a story and left. And of course that night, the State of the Union address is, oh, and as I'm leaving, I tell Hope Hicks, I say, Hope, oh, by the way, as you know, I work for ABC News. I have to be able to say that I just met with the president, and and what can I say? And so we established the parameters of that. So at the beginning of the State of the Union coverage on ABC, George turns to me and said, well, you met with the president. What did he say? This was before the speech. I said, well, he said he's going to have a speech on this. We'll have to see it in practice. And I told him that he's going to need, it's just that'd be a great speech. If you do that, awesome. And, but you need to follow it up on it. So at the end of the speech, he gives a speech. And my takeaway from the speech is that he had sprinkled it with a lot of this bipartisan language and a couple of unity words, in it, but it wasn't a unifying speech. It wasn't like how can I bridge divides and what we could fix and all of that. So of course, after the speech is over, they turn to me and they say, well, and of course, so then I say how I felt about it, even after having the meeting in the Oval Office. I said that speech, sprinkling a speech with a bunch of healing words and unity words, is a bit like thinking you're on a diet if you eat a bunch of pizza and drink a Diet Coke. And the White House was livid. The funny thing about the White House was livid after, because they always call and do things. They had thought, I think the president thought, oh, he was going to get in there and he was going to like charm me or something, and that would all of a sudden change. And they were really like, how dare I criticize the president after you met with them? So it was like, you guys understand what you just did. I met with you guys, which actually gave me more power to criticize. So the long answer to your question is yeah, I know I did a Chris Matthews on it. Good point, Betty. But since I'm at the big table, there are many things that 70 or 80% of the country agree on. And if I think the leaders in Congress, if all they did was, let's just do the things that 70 or 80% of the countries agree on. Let's just do those things. Let's do the things on gun reform that 70 or 80% of the country agree with. Let's do the things on infrastructure that 70 or 80% of the country agree with. Let's do things on immigration, the DACA children, the DACA now adults, that 70 or 80% of the country agree on. Let's just do those things. Let's leave all the 50-50 things to another day. Let's just do those things that 70 or 80% of the country agree on. And so I think that the way to get to the common good is just pick off the low-hanging fruit first, right? Pick off the idea that Americans can see that the country can come together. Just pick off those. And it's actually, I don't understand, it's so politically beneficial if they did it. I don't get it. But we're now locked in the system that any give on any of it is seen as weakness, which is actually the exact opposite of it. Weakness is not giving. Weakness is actually not giving. Stubbornness is usually defined by weakness.
It's a paradox again.
Yeah, it is very much a paradox. So that's to me. Pick the low, do the low. If I were advising Donald Trump, grab the low-hanging fruit, get that done. It'll change the nature of the country. Will then be like, aha, something can get done, and that would change it. Just pick the low-hanging fruit.
Okay, who's got the microphone?
I do.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay. Can you hear me?
yes, sir.
I want to ask you this question.
Hold it a little closer.
Okay. You were talking about how we as capitalism has changed in America. Okay.
I'll repeat it if you can. I can hear you.
Okay.
I'll repeat it.
Well, my question is, how does capitalism change China? How has it changed India? Why is it successful in those countries and you say it's on a decline here?
So the question is why has capitalism been successful in China and India and it's on a decline here? So I think the answer is in just what's happening, right? And so millions and millions and millions of people in China and India are being lifted out, right, by a capitalistic system that's being lifted out. And as I said, preface the statement, I'm a huge believer in capitalism. I'm a huge believer in a system that is lifting everybody simultaneously. And so I think it's working there because it's actually doing that. It's not working here because it's not doing that, right? And so when you have I think the last data I saw, 95% of all of the wealth creation in the last 25 years has gone to the top 5% of people in the country. 95% of the wealth creation has only gone to 5% of people in the country. That means the rest of the country is only getting 5% of the distribution of capitalism. As I said, that's not sustainable. That's why people are getting more and more upset. That's why people are getting more and more angry at certain things. And I think that's why we have these two sides, that it's either a fight over some level of socialism, or it's a fight with nationalism, like we're gonna shut down, we're gonna preserve ourselves, this is what we're gonna do. So I actually believe in the idea of not having laws and not having regulations and not having a system, not having a tax code, in my view, that doesn't reward wages, that actually punishes wages more than it punishes how wealth is created, how most of wealth is created in the top 1 or 5% of it. They are actually given a lot more tax leeway in how wealth is created when you don't earn an income. People that earn an income in this country are actually punished more, much more, than people that are creating wealth without an income, without wages. And so let's go back. The 50s was a great time in America, right? It was a great time the middle class grew as faster, and there were more people in the middle class in the 1950s than any other time, and that continued into the 60s and continued for a while afterwards. Why don't we sort of understand what was going on in that time, or a tax system, or a regulatory system, or all of that was happening in the 50s. And keep in mind, the highest tax bracket in the 50s, when one of the largest amounts of wealth was created, but the largest middle class movement, the top tax bracket was 80%. And I'm not saying 80% was in the 50s. The top tax bracket in the 1950s was 80%. When everybody reflects on the 50s, wow, that was a great time and all of that. Look at all this middle class jobs and all of that. And we had a GI Bill that was helping bring people out, was educating them and doing all of that. I'm not advocating an 80% tax bracket, but I am advocating a tax system and a regulatory system that is actually more pure and more and sees a dollar in a wage much more equally as in a dollar in a capital, how you retrieve it in the stock market, or how you get it back in some other way. So I think India and China have millions and millions of people are moving up to upper classes. And I think the last data I saw in our country is the ability for somebody to move to one class to another in America is at an all-time low. The ability for somebody in the lower class to move to the middle class is as low as it's ever been. Their ability to move from one class to another. What's happening more than not is more people are falling. More people are falling down a class than moving up a class in America today. That's not the case in China and India. Millions and millions of people are moving up classes in China and India. So that's all I would say is let's do capitalism, but let's do it in a more pure way. Let's do it in a more fair way, that instead of 30 million people gaining, 300 million people gain as we rise. And I'm all for wealth creation, and I'm all for how that can happen and rewarding people. But we ought to have a system where the huge chunk of society gains simultaneously.
All right, we've got a question here.
You talked about the pairings of good and bad, and I don't want my biases to show, but I'm presuming that what we need to be looking for is the good guy. And I don't see any galloping along, and they need to show up pretty quickly. Who do you see that might possibly
Sure.
win that pole position?
Sure, so I see a whole bunch of people in this room that could do that. I think many times people turn to, okay, who could be that, as they go, who could be that president? But I think this change is going to be led by somebody getting elected for Congress, somebody getting elected as a state rep, somebody getting elected at city council, somebody getting elected somebody getting elected county commissioner, somebody getting elected in various offices. What I think you're going to see is, I've done the same landscape, so that's what I think where the fundamental change in movement comes from, the good guys and gals. And there's a lot of gals running, which is great. I think it's great. I tell people this, why don't we we've had men running this show for 200 and something years, why don't we just turn it over to women? Just turn it over to women and let's see how they do, because I don't think it's got to be better. I think this election year, one thing to keep in mind, nobody knew Barack Obama's name a few years before he ran for president. Nobody knew who he was. He didn't even get elected to the United States Senate until 2004, and he ran for president in 2008. And so I think there's going to be some people that get elected in 2018 that are going to be women and men that we're going to be like, oh, those are the kind, those are the who's we need. They're probably folks in Congress that I don't know or that I'm unaware of. But I think watch the leaders that get elected in this midterm election. And some of them may be independents. Some of them may be new Republicans that took on the party and sort of fought the party. And some of them, many of them may be Democrats. Watch the results of this year's election, and you'll see some people emerge that become the Barack Obama in many people's mind of like, and then you can't. There's no longer an argument. I mean, the argument can no longer be in our country. Well, you have to do this and this and this to be president, right? Barack Obama sort of crossed part of that off, and Donald Trump certainly crossed the rest of that off in what you need to do in this. So watch the results of the midterms, and I think you'll see many of those folks emerge in the midterms, elected in various places around the country, I think.
We've got lots of, who's got, oh,
Let's go back to the comments about the press, please, and the critical role that the media and press has to play in a democracy with challenging falsehoods and calling BS.
Sure.
for instance. And how do we solve the issue now of the echo chambers?
So the first question is I think the press took a, one of the things about the press is like a aircraft carrier, right? It's a powerful thing, but it takes a while to turn, right? And I think the press took a while to turn into what they were facing, right? All politicians, many of them, whether it's Obama or Bush or Clinton or whatever, fudge certain things or spin certain things, but nobody was prepared for what has emerged in the last couple of years. Just like, it's not going to be night out. The sun's already up and bright, and it's noon right now. Like statements like that are just provably false for any person, obviously. And so I think it took the press a while to turn. They're in a whole new world, and that they're going to have to figure out a way to confront it and be much more vocal in how they do that. I think many of them have. I don't think it helps to call people liars. I think the president has not told the truth many times. I think he, more than any other person I've seen in my lifetime in politics and all of that, I don't think it helps to say liar. I just think that name calling to me doesn't accomplish much. People can decide for themselves what they want to do, but for me that doesn't help much. But I think we have to be able to call BS on it. We can say that's just not true, false. Hold on, let me finish answering. And so I think more and more are doing that. More and more are advocating that, and more are see that their role in this country today. The press is one of the last real things holding anybody accountable. I mean, you think about it. In today, the leaders in Washington aren't holding people accountable when they screw up, and you've seen this in decision after decision after decision that was made. I think what happened yesterday, and basically the House Republican Committee shutting down an investigation, is an example of an unwillingness to hold them accountable and not even do the job that they were elected to do, which I don't even understand from a political basis. The 2018, a wave is coming, huge wave is coming. The only question is how big it is, right? How much of it is, and how many people lose in that election. And so I think the press is turning that way, and so that's one. The answer to your echo chamber is I think that I think more and more of us, and I think the people like the wealthy people that are the wealthy people in the world that see this the same way, that understand the media is the only thing right now that's going to help preserve our democracy in this. You can criticize Amazon and all that, but Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post for $200 million and investing millions and millions and millions into it to hire reporters, to hire investigators, to do all of that, I think is a huge service to the country. Yes. You could talk about all the things he's done and all the things he's done. That was a huge service, because if anybody's broken more stories than anybody, it's the Washington Post, and they couldn't have done that unless somebody had invested money in it that didn't want to get a financial return on it. The fascinating thing is the worth of the Washington Post has risen dramatically now since they've actually done their job in that way. And so I think you're going to see a pairing with, there's more applications for journalism school than any time since Watergate.
Wow.
The highest number of people applying to be journalists, to go to journalism school is just like the wave that happened after Watergate. People are seeing it that way, which is a great thing, which is people now pursuing careers in that way. And so some combination of philanthropy done by people that have great wealth, that see it, that have a concern, combined with all of us in the business, and I have this conversation with many of my friends that are in this, pushing each other to hold people more accountable, and then helping protect each other. Because one of the things that we get a lot of, and I do this a lot, even though I work for ABC, I'll congratulate somebody at NBC or CBS, or I'll go on social media and say, Jake Tapper or somebody did a great job at everything, because the amount of heat they get, the amount of attacks they get, that we have to be willing to let go of our tribe, my little tribe of ABC, and help protect others who are trying to speak the truth and do the job right. So I can do that, and I can encourage others to do that. But I'm heartened by the fact that there are some philanthropists that are now much more interested in supporting this, and the number of young people now that 5 years ago or 3 years ago wouldn't have been interested in going into journalism, but now are.
All right, we've got one, okay, Gaylord and then Curtis, and then we're gonna have to wrap up.
Well,
Hey, Gaylord.
Wait, turn it on the mic though.
He's on, I can hear
Oh,
him.
you can, okay.
I'll use my outside voice. Great to see you again.
You too,
Thanks for
Gaylord.
coming in. I'm still ill from having read about your trip to India and Turkey. But in summary, and Cari mentioned it earlier, but the paradoxes that carry throughout your book obviously raised for a lot of us here whether you detect hope for a new way from the current administration and all that you see, not just relative to the president and administration, but what you see in the country.
Sure. So the short answer is yes, I do. But you have to be willing to look for it and identify it. I think you're not going to find a lot of it on the cable broadcasts, the hope I see. You'll find some. But I think Austin is a perfect example. Every day there's somebody starting up some new social entrepreneurs that's starting something in order to solve a problem. Somebody is actually willing to run for something that they weren't willing to run for. I mean, we now have people that are like, politics and journalism has become a thing that they're now hungry for and they want to get involved in. That wasn't the case 10 years ago.
That's right.
And so they're starting new operations. They're not waiting on our old institutions. They're forming new companies. They're doing all sorts of stuff. I think there's a bridging in the generations, as I talked about before. There's a bridging of the generations of encouragement by us who have been through it in the old days, or in the days of encouraging people to, go ahead and run. I'll figure out what I can do to support you and how you can do that, or you might want to think about it this way. And so I have great, great optimism and hope. One, because I know the values that our country represent. I know where a majority of the country fundamentally is. But I also seeing signs everywhere I go, wherever it happens to be, of people saying, I'm not satisfied with this, I don't like what this is going on, and I'm tired of complaining. I'm tired of complaining, I want to actually do something. And I think that's when people finally turn, they get sick of hearing their own voice complain about something, and they say, what can I do? And whether it's starting a small company somewhere to help people, or supporting somebody, being an angel and helping somebody with $1,000 or $5,000, or encouraging somebody to run for office, or supporting journalism scholarships, or whatever it happens to be. So I have great hope and optimism, but I'm the ultimate optimist. I've been married and divorced twice, so anybody who knows me, I'm an optimist, which means like Larry King is the ultimate optimist, because Zsa Zsa Gabor, they're all optimists. Elizabeth Taylor, they're all optimists. So yeah, I'm very optimistic.
One more question from Curtis.
Well, you've kind of answered my question, but I may be wrong on this, but it seems like the White House is a little dysfunctional. Maybe 250 million people in this country, Betsy DeVos was not the best person to be educated, but Congress approved. Maybe for those of us who care about the environment, Scott Pruitt was not our guy, but Congress approved. But my question is, how much danger is this country in with what's going on there?
So I would say, so the question is he named a number of people that weren't on his cup of tea, or many people's cup of tea that are holding position of power. I don't think Donald Trump would deny that the White House is in chaos and is dysfunctional, because I actually think he encourages it. And that's how he operates, and that's his, let's quote unquote, his leadership style. I think he wants to be, he likes it, but he wants to be praised for it instead of criticized for it. That's the difference, is he thinks it's true, but he wants to be praised for that style of leadership. And of course, today is another example where the Secretary of State found out on Twitter that he was no longer had a job, which is amazing to me that that's how he found out today, that in the midst of the North Korean and North negotiations. It's amazing to me. I think, as I said, I think in the short term, it's a very disruptive and in many ways destructive moment. And I think that we're called to help protect people in this moment that are vulnerable. I think that that's a calling that we have. And you can say it's a Christian calling or a Jewish calling or a Muslim calling or I'm a person of the earth calling or whatever the happen to be, is that we have to help protect in a moment like this. And there's always been, as I say, moments like this where in the short term there's people are harmed. People are harmed in the moments like this. And as I say, all of the anger and all of the thing is it's easy to pick out and say Donald Trump's the problem. If we just remove Donald Trump, then everything will be solved. It's just not true, right? It's just fundamentally not true at this moment in time. I understand that if you took out Donald Trump, that we may not feel like we're in chaos every single day. Frank Bruni has a great column today that writes for the New York Times. I don't know if you read it today. And he was over in Italy. He's over in Italy right now. It sort of goes to how people are dealing with the level of chaos in the country. He was over in Italy and he realized that he had the same exact plate of pasta that he loved so much 3 days in a row, the same exact plate. And he realized, he said it was because of Trump, because he said it was the only thing he could count on that gave him comfort. So he said maybe the solution is just we all should just eat a bunch of pasta. That's Frank's column today. So being in Chez Zee, I'm going to encourage you to order whatever you like on the menu whenever you're here, and maybe you'll help with it. So I think in the moment, but I think we have to help protect the people that are most vulnerable to harm in this moment. I think that's what we're called to do. I really appreciate you all being here. I love to have this conversation with you, and I hope we each realize the power that we have. I think that, so we way underestimate our own power. We way underestimate it. We think, I'm just a small little thing in this great big world. What can I do? What can I do? Well, all change has been led by people that, like you, just stood up and said, here's what I want to do, and this is the kind of world I want to see, and I'm going to start painting that landscape in my own way. And so I would just encourage you to realize the power you have into whatever change that you want to bring, and to just step into it. Step into that power that you already have. So thank you, and I appreciate the time.